All right, so we are live now. This is my first broadcast on YouTube, and I've got a guest there. His name's Brett Clark, and he's from America. And we are going to talk about the tour Afriforum is doing in America right now and what the average American thinks about South Africa and the situation here. I know that the media here in South Africa has freaked out about the whole situation with Afriforum going there. Just for you people who do not know who Afriforum is, they are a civil rights organization, and they are fighting for the rights of farmers and against the whole farm murders thing. So the media here in South Africa wants to sue them for high treason, or they say the government should accuse them of high treason because they are making our name bad in America and so on. And they also said, I listened to one of our radios, Talk Radio 702, saying that they should also be accused of rape because they are raping the economy by what they are doing. And yeah, so Brett, what do you think about the whole situation?
I think it's really funny because it's not really something you hear too much about in the United States. And I'm sort of wondering, as an American, as Afriforum, as a civil rights organization, are they pro-communist government? Are they anti-communist government? Does that have something to do with it, or is it just their advocacy that makes them an enemy of the state?
Well, they are definitely anti-communist. They are not a fan of the communist ANC or the communist EFF. But yeah, they also, the whole policy of farm murders, the state is very against anyone doing anything about it. Yeah, so that might be one of the things that that is aggravating the state. Have you heard anything at that side about it?
Everything that you hear in the U.S. about South Africa is from international news organizations. Like, I know Al Jazeera. You had a video on Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera did a video. Other, Huffington Post will do a video or something. So these left-wing organizations will do it, and it's all about the income inequality. You never hear about the life and death issues that face the country. You only hear about You see videos that are sort of meant to stoke images of the apartheid still living and stuff like that. You never hear about the farm murders or anything else, or that much less you don't even know what Afriforum is in the United States.
Yeah, I think you might hear a lot more about them in the recent future, because they are actually, I can't tell you too much about what exactly they are doing, because they are some of the organizations they are going to talk to haven't yet given them permission to publicly state that they are talking to them. But I can give you a heads up, they should be on Fox News in the recent future, and I can't tell you where on which show, but look at around, let's say, 8 p.m. Eastern time.
Yeah, it rhymes with Smucker Marlson or something like that. I don't know.
I don't know, man. Yeah.
It's interesting because just in the past, I was always aware of. I knew more than the average person about South Africa for a while, but it wasn't until the last 12 months or so that I started learning about, I started actually, reading about the history and, the modern issues that face the country and the Boer people. And it's still something that, if I told one of my friends about it, they'd be like, what are you talking about? I would guess that 20% of Americans don't even know that white people live in South Africa until they turn on the Olympics and see that there's a white South African swimmer in lane 4, right on Michael Phelps' tail or something like that.
Yeah, that's quite something about white South Africans, is they are excellent swimmers. I think one thing that I can point out about that, there's no other people in the world that has won so many gold medals for how little people they are, or how small their population is. So
I know it's a tough term for people to grasp, but I believe you're searching for the term per capita.
Exactly, yeah. That's actually one thing that I want to point out is I was supposed to have a debate right now with some black guy that challenged me in the comments, and always when these black guys challenge me, I tell them listen, okay, if you want to debate me, then fine. Next weekend, 8 p.m., I will do a debate with you and you can come state your case. And then every time they are like, yeah, I want to come debate you and I'm going to do it. I'm going to destroy you. And usually they don't understand the term per capita because they always say, yeah, there's 19,000 Africans murdered every year while there's just like a few hundred white people being murdered. So why would you want to um, say that the white murders are more important than the black murders, and then you tell them about the whole story of per capita, and then they don't grasp it, then it's above them for some reason.
Yeah, and these guys you speak of in your comments, I would point out that they're almost always South Africans, right?
Yeah,
You
almost
very
always
rarely
South
get.
African blacks. Although,
If I had to guess, I would think that a lot of like African Americans, what I mean, it's like literally in the United States would be. I'm not sure if they'd be sympathetic, but they'd be much more sympathetic than the average, Bantu person in South Africa, um,
yeah,
because
much
they
more, but
understand what it's like to be literally be the minority population.
in some cases you are right, but in other cases you see a lot of African Americans cheering on the whole situation and say, "Oh, at
Hmm.
least these Africans are waking up, and it's good that they are now killing the crackers and stuff like that." That's what they say
Yeah,
because they love that word. And yeah, so I haven't met one, or I have met some in the comments that say they are sorry for what's happening, but yeah, there are also some that are horrible at what they say.
yeah, and it to me, it's interesting to see with the whole Kanye and love is powerful and stuff like that, dragon energy. It's interesting that if that when that political movement, if that's definitely going to, I mean, if the Republican Party in the United States wins just 5% more of the black male vote, they swing like 4 states
Hmm.
for Senate seats at least. I mean, and I wonder if that coincides with the rise of awareness of what's going on in South Africa, how that'll pan out demographically. Who falls on which side, and from the U.S. point of view. If tribalism is that thick, and people will only see color and they'll just pick the side that they identify with racially, or if they'll see the two sides as entities separated from race, and recognize that
Mm,
there's factors that go into it, that just because they're white people doesn't mean that they're we're so used to in the United States, if you're white you're the majority. That's not
exactly.
the case in South Africa, and that's why it's a
And
different
also
feel.
not for long in America. I think you guys will be a minority in the next 20 to 30 years if the trends go on like they do.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's by 2050, will be a white people will be a minority. But what's interesting is that, if I'm speaking frankly, African Americans and white people are in the same boat,
Mm.
because their population isn't increasing. Um,
Yeah, yeah,
in a way, their power will be lost when they become
yeah.
a tinier minority. Because right now they're still, if they're not, I think there's still more African Americans than Latinos,
Mm.
but I'm not 100% sure actually. But as they're saying that about 12-13% of the population, and the Latin sourced immigration rises the Hispanic population up to closer to 40. That you'll see the African Americans will be losing power in a lot of ways, because
Yeah,
they'll no longer have this center stage.
I agree with you. I just want to start reading some questions so we don't get behind on them. Some guy here, me to ask, when approximately after 94 did the breakdown of relations start to get really bad? I want to point out, I think it's probably around the turn of the millennium. And one of the things that can be noted there is that the then President Thabo Mbeki disbanded the commando system, which was actually a rural system which protected the farmers. And we don't know why yet until this day. And after that, the farm murders have definitely skyrocketed. And also, if you look at like sports games where South Africa played international, earlier, right after the 1994 thing, everyone was going for, yeah, this Rainbow Nation and everything, and there were people waving flags from both the old and the new South Africa, and nobody really had a problem with it. You can see that, especially in the rugby games, if you look at the World Cup for 1995 and so on. And then the hate just started increasing later on. And even up until that point where white people were say they are not even allowed anymore to wave their flag. So I think around 2002 might be your best bet.
I was as you were saying that, I was sort of thinking that this is just a guess, but when apartheid ended in 1994 and everything, I would guess that there was a feeling of like, oh, this is our time from the black population. This is our time. We can rise up. And my guess is that 6, 7 years down the line, when economic conditions dropped to the floor instead of rose for them, there was probably a
Mm,
lot of frustration, and a lot of that might have been taken out on
yeah.
on scapegoats.
So someone also pointed out that they said the commando system was disbanded because the ANC said it played part in apartheid and it was replaced with nothing. So maybe that might be some agenda that they were pushing for even earlier, and they didn't replace it because they didn't really care about the farmers. That's certainly the argument that Afriforum is putting on the table, and that for which they are getting crucified in the media in South Africa. Also, I have to point out the media in South Africa is extremely left wing. The Huffington Post South Africa is considered the center here. And if you look at all the garbage they wrote the last 2 days about Afriforum, I'm actually doing a whole video on it. Should be released by Tuesday on how bad they say Afriforum should be prosecuted for high treason and all these ridiculous stuff. Then there's no real right wing alternative here. We have no Fox News here, so that's quite a big problem at this moment.
We got more questions.
No, I don't see much more questions in the questions so far. So, what have you read on your media that side so far about the Afriforum going there and the situation?
Uh, well, almost everything that I've found, I find on Twitter, because it's not like it's getting posted to Drudge, at the top of the screen or anything like that.
Yeah.
Um, but I've seen these crazy theories, especially in your comments section, that Afriforum is coming to the United States to buy guns to bring to bring back to South Africa to start some crazy war or something. And I guess that's all they think of the United States as like a gun shop.
Yeah, I saw that as well. It's the EFF that's claiming that they're coming to the US to build up their army and buy guns and all sorts of ridiculous claims like that. Apparently, they say they're talking to President Donald Trump, and Donald Trump wants to take over South Africa, and that's why he has Afriforum there to set up his army here in South Africa, and all such ridiculous claims like. I don't even know how they are being allowed to make such ridiculous claims, but with our media here, they will probably not say nothing about these claims. And then you have a guy like Julius Malema who's got 2 million followers on Twitter, which is huge for an African politician. It's by far the biggest for any South African politician, and he makes these claims without ever being nobody says anything about it. So that's how it goes.
Yeah, it's at some point when you have such a vocal majority and there's no one to counter it, no matter what they say, it becomes the truth.
Exactly as you say it.
But explain to some of the Americans in the crowd what Julius Malema is famous for in his speeches and his rallies and everything else like that.
Yeah, Julius Malema is quite a controversial figure in our media. He's all over the news, always for saying things like "kill the Boer" at every single one of his speeches, and stuff like that. And he's also very anti-Semitic and also saying the same type of stuff about the Jews as well. And he's just allowed to go on doing all of that. Something that can also be pointed out is Afriforum recently opened a court case against him because the government didn't want to prosecute him for this, and the court case was about corruption and fraud. While he was getting a salary of about $4,000 per month, he was driving around in $200,000-300,000 cars and had like $100,000 watch on his arm, and he drank Johnny Walker Blue Label and stuff like that, and he was living like a billionaire, and nobody knew where all that money was coming from, and he ended up with a lot of properties and farms and everything that was worth well over $1 million as well. And still nobody until this day knows where he got that money, or people speculate, but nothing was proven in court, and the ANC didn't ever want to prosecute him for that. So Afriforum's going to prosecute him for that as well, and that's why I think one of the reasons why Afriforum is so demonized by the EFF in the last two or so weeks.
Because they're trying to cut off the head of the snake.
Exactly.
Now, what are the courts like in South Africa? What are the odds that you get a fair shake in South Africa?
Well, it's very ideological. Like the judges are extremely ideological. Most of them are communists from the old South African Communist Party. And that's why we had things like the woman who was sent to jail for 3 years for using an offensive word. It's like the social justice warriors that you have there in the United States, but times 10. Like, and I would think the social justice warriors there, especially there where you live in the north, would want you to go to jail for saying something they don't agree with. But at least they won't be able to send you to jail for it. While here in South Africa, those people are the ones that sit on the bench who are the judges. And we also don't have a jury system, so the judge makes the only decision. And they are the judges, and then they send people to jail for things like that. And so it's very difficult to win a case because you're right. You usually just win a case because your ideology is right.
Mm-hmm. The U.S. is, having some of that with their own troubles, where basically time and time again Trump has set, whether it's a law or executive order or what, and it's being bounced back by the lower circuit courts, and it's almost always being overturned by a higher court, or even it'll go up to the Supreme Act down the lower circuits. But we luckily have a system in place where even a rogue judge, he can only delay the government. He can't stop them in their tracks. He can't unduly, put someone in South Africa. Even if you were to appeal, like that conviction of the woman who only used the K word, that would just be, she would just appeal that, and she'd probably be all right.
Yeah,
she'd be a rogue judge.
She actually did appeal it, and then the judge just what do you call it? He told her she's not allowed to appeal it. She didn't get leave to appeal it. So basically, that's it for her. I'm just going to go through some questions again because I think we got a bit behind. Someone here asked, you said before that the right to return to Europe is impractical, so what would be the most helpful and useful way to preserve the position of whites? I would say definitely to just restore the commando system, because back when we had the commando system, we were able to defend ourselves on farms and stuff like that. It never was a problem for us because we could easily defend ourselves in our commandos. Nobody really. It was very rare that people actually were killed, even in the cities when the commando system was in the city. So if we can just get the government to allow us again to have that radio network and the weapons and everything, that would be great. Also, in 2002, we had new weapon laws that made it almost impossible for us to buy weapons. So that would be it. So we just need to get our laws back that give us, basically we need our Second Amendment back, if you want to say it in American terms. Always when those guys like David Hogg and Emma Gonzalez and those people go on, they say they want to take away the Second Amendment, I just think to myself, well, you're welcome to give it to us then if you don't want it, because we really need it. So that's my opinion on that.
Explain real quick to the folks at home with the commander system. Commander system? Is that it?
The commando system is actually a system that is used all over the world, but it was invented by the old Boers, where you don't really have an army. It's more like a militia out of all these small units of small militias that work on their own as a unit. It's almost like you can say the federal system, but in the army, and it worked really well. I mean, we won against the English once using that. We won against the British Empire at the war, and that it's really big because nobody in that time ever won a war against the British Empire. We were the first in, like, I almost want to say 200 years, that
That
to
was in
win a war
1770.
against the British Empire. Yeah, no, that was in the late 19th century, so
I'm saying that
1898 and about there.
you might have to go back to the American independence to find an
Yeah, I
example.
think I think the American independence was the last time when anybody won a war against the British Empire. Someone also said I should say some quotes that Malema said. Malema said stuff like, "We shouldn't call for the slaughter of whites yet." That's one of
Yeah,
them. Another one that he said is, "These whites must be happy that we're not calling for their genocide also yet." So he's saying things like that all the time, and he's basically inciting murders of white people, and he doesn't get any punishment for it.
he
Um,
did though. He did get in trouble one time for saying seen him kill the boar, but and so now he sings "Kiss the Boar," right? Quite
exactly,
tongue in
yeah,
cheek.
exactly. But he also gave
Doesn't
that
quite
up.
mean it.
He also gave that up. Nowadays, the EFF is singing
He's
"Kill the
back at
Boy"
it.
again. Yeah, yeah. Someone that asks, oh shucks, it went away now. Um, I need to go back to find my place in the questions. Oh, now it's going to be difficult to get my place again because the questions jump to the bottom again. So yeah, that's about it. If you have more, oh, someone asked about Malema being anti-Semitic. Yeah, I don't really know. Him and the ANC, all of them are being anti-Semitic, and I really don't really know why. Because the ANC, for example, had on their own webpage the slogan "Keep calm and kill the Jews." And I actually have a Jewish friend in Cape Town, a very rich Jewish guy. His name's Brian Cohen, and he's told me, listen, when the ANC was fighting against apartheid, almost all of their funding and their intellectual help came from Jews, and now they just turn against the Jews like this. And that is true. Most of the help came from those Jewish people, and now they turn against them, and they are so anti-Israel that they actually wanted to arsenate the embassy, the Israel embassy, and they are very vocal about being anti-Israel. So nobody really knows why exactly they turn against the Jews so badly.
They even voted. We were talking about this earlier. They even voted against the U.S. moving the embassy in Israel, and now because of that, Trump has hit South Africa with was it a steel or aluminum tariffs or both?
Yeah, both, and that's actually quite funny because of the fact that they voted against Donald Trump's decision to move the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem. They are now seeing steel and aluminum tariffs, and that was probably one of the biggest exports that we had, except for gold, to the US was steel and aluminum because those are both minerals that South Africa has a lot of. So that will really, really, really hit the economy of South Africa hard.
Which is ironic because they're blaming the Afriforum for ruining the South African economy.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. It's actually quite funny also, our Minister of Foreign Affairs, when the Australian Minister, Peter Dutton, said that he wanted to fast-track visas for white South Africans to Australia, she said she demands that he takes it back because that's racist. And I mean, so it's more racist to want to get people out of the country than it is to kill them, it seems, according to the ANC.
Right. If the Boers were so terrible, let them leave.
Exactly, yeah, and that's actually a cartoon that I saw in the newspaper once. Like all these people, Malema and Lindiwe Sisulu, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and Jacob Zuma, all of them always shouted, "Get out of here! You stole our land, leave the country, and everything." And the moment they get a chance to easily leave the country, everyone loses their minds and they say, "No, you can't leave." I think they know we're paying most of their taxes because I mean there's just 1.7 million taxpayers in South Africa that is sustaining a population of about 16 million people on welfare. So there's about 10 people on welfare for every taxpayer, and they know that almost 90% of those taxpayers or the taxpayer money is coming from whites. So they know that if we leave, they are in big trouble. Also, with some countries that are considering stopping foreign aid to South Africa, I'm pretty sure if the Afriforum trip to the USA is successful, we will see them stopping their foreign aid to South Africa, which I think last year it was around $700 million USD. So that will also hit them hard.
Yeah.
You can also point out that most of those foreign aids are for medic aid and stuff like that, but it usually just ends up in the pockets of politicians, and that's why we still have a dysfunctional, non-existent healthcare system here in South Africa at this moment.
And I like to point out that almost every single country that is sending foreign aid to South Africa, or the entire continent for that matter, are from evil, racist colonizers.
Exactly. It's like all the foreign aid that we get are from European countries or majority white countries. You won't see Japan or South Korea or any of those so-called rich Asian countries ever send foreign aid to an African country. It's always come from Europe. You know, have you ever read Rudyard Kipling's poem, The White Man's Burden? And if you read that, you will understand the situation of the white man. Yeah, it's exactly like Kipling wrote a century ago.
Yeah. And he was from a different Commonwealth state, was he not? He's from India?
I'm
Was he
sorry?
from South Africa? Was Kipling from India or South Africa?
Kipling, he was a businessman that was big in the East Indian spice trading. He came to South Africa many times, but he was born in India and he also stayed in India for most of his life until he retired and he went back to England. But I think most of his life he was traveling around on ships and so forth, and that's where he wrote most of his books. Definitely, the Jungle Book, which is probably his most famous work, was inspired by India and the Indian jungles.
Right. But what's interesting is that if the British have obviously left India and they've left places like Hong Kong, but they've left a lot of these indelible marks on their culture, at least in the areas that they were present. And I wonder though if the Boers, and the Anglos and everyone, all the European descendants were to leave South Africa, would that indelible mark be left on the land there in South Africa, or would it be washed away forever? And would South Africa become unrecognizable from every other subcontinental country?
I'm sorry, I missed that a bit.
Well, I'm saying, let's say you could magically pick up every Anglo and Boer and move them to Australia, name a country, would South Africa have that indelible mark on their culture from the time that they had European descendants living living amongst them, like India and Hong Kong still have that sort of, in the parts where they were colonized, that cultural residue that has helped them in a lot of ways
I think
moving forward compared
they
to.
will have it for a few years, just like Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe had some of the best infrastructure in the world. They had some of the best farms in the world, and then they kicked out all of the white farmers, and they still had that for a few years after that. But they were breaking it down and breaking it down after Mugabe chased out all the white farmers. There's absolutely nothing left, and there's famine and people are literally selling rats on the streets to eat because that's the only meat they're getting because there are no farmers that can give them beef or pork or whatever.
In the US, we have this common idea that our wealth is built off of slave labor, and that we wouldn't be a wealthy country without the free, quote unquote, free slave labor, even though nothing's free. Even slaves cost money to maintain, just like and just like a worker would. But that it's maintained that we are rich because of the free labor. But as you see in Zimbabwe, when the Europeans left, was it just the fact that there were a bunch of people working in fields, or was it the infrastructure? Was it the genius behind rotational crop or agriculture?
Definitely.
Was it the invention of the airplane that made America a rich country? Like all these things that these, not quite, these sort of, it's the ideas that make countries rich. It's not free
Mm.
labor or just manual labor, or else you'd see, why is Haiti a poor country when
You're
they
right.
were.
You're 100% right. We get that argument all the time from the EFF saying you're a racist if you say that the black farms will fail, even though the statistics showed us that 90% or more than 90% of those farms did fail. And the reason for that is these people think just because they've been working on a farm, they've been doing all the work, and the farmer is just sitting on his porch and smoking his gentleman's pipe all day long, and they are working in the field. So they're actually doing all the work, and the farmer's doing nothing. So let's take an example of a citrus farm where there's about 1,000 employees on it who basically pick the oranges and they fix the wires and they fertilize the soil and do all of those manual labor. Just because you have been picking oranges for 17 years doesn't mean that you know the plant pathology to know which trees are sick, to know which trees to take out. It doesn't mean you know the soil science. It doesn't mean you can take a sample of that soil and do tests on it and know exactly which fertilizer to put in and to make the next year's lemons or oranges or whatever grow just as well as the previous year. It doesn't mean that you know how to read the market. It doesn't mean that you know how to or when to buy your seeds and when to sell your oranges, to know how to read the market like that. It doesn't mean that you know how to store all of those things. It doesn't mean that you can do basically anything. But these people, they don't understand. They think that they are the only ones doing any work because they are the ones actually in the field picking the oranges, and that's not true at all. Most of the work is done by the farmer while he's sitting on his porch doing the mathematics, because arguably the most important part of farming is definitely mathematics, and that's what he's been sitting doing on his porch while they think he's sitting there doing nothing.
It's an ecosystem. You know what I mean? It's a fragile ecosystem. You can't have one without the other. I mean, you can always
Definitely.
replace labor maybe with the newest high tech automated tractor, but again, someone has to invent that tractor. Maybe not even the farmer can just invent the
Mm,
tractor. You need maybe even a higher genius. So
exactly.
it's an ecosystem, and when you rattle the ecosystem, you're left with destruction. You're left with fire.
Definitely. You're 100% right on that one. The thing about South Africa is we have the minimum wage here is being pushed up all the time. And at some point, that farmer who is having to pay the ridiculous minimum wages all the time just says, well, it's cheaper for me to buy a John Deere machine that picks my oranges for me than it is to pay my workers, because that machine might cost 10 million rand, which is about $1 million. And that's a lot of money. So now still I can help the people, I can give them jobs, I can give them housing. But when the government keeps pushing that minimum wage, I won't be able to do that. I'll rather just buy this machine and let that thing do it and pay that off over the next few years. And that's one thing that also that the government or the communist people, any communists, don't understand. They don't understand that that the worst minimum wage that you can get is zero, and that's the minimum wage most people are going to get, because if they push up the minimum wage so much, most people are going to be unemployed. I think Cyril Ramaphosa, our current president, actually said this is a big problem in South Africa, that already 35% of black people are unemployed, and that number is just rising. And he's saying that's on the one side, and then on the other side, he's saying no, we are going to push up the minimum wages. The minimum wages went up again 5 days ago, and it's a very big problem for all employers. I mean, nobody is so hateful that he likes these poor people getting more poor, but it's impossible for most farmers to pay these minimum wages now.
Hmm. It's
Yeah.
actually an interesting dynamic where the economy doesn't just affect the African worker either. It affects the Boer, and it affects the white worker too. I think it was your tweet or someone else's, or someone recently told me that the black unemployment rate, which is dropping in the United States, is now lower, way lower than the white unemployment rate in South Africa.
Yeah, that was Aaron's Roots' tweet.
Yeah, it's a weird dynamic that no one would think. Just no American would think that because we hear how bad especially the youth African American unemployment rate is. Um,
Exactly. And I
no
think
one would assume that.
the unemployment rate in the US was probably quite a lot lower when you had a more libertarian, more federal system as well. It just goes to show that the more the government wants to implement all these programs to help the people, all they're actually doing is destroying these people's chances to get an actual job. I mean, look at South Korea, for example. That's a very good example. They were like one of the poorest countries on earth just a few years ago, and by a few years,
Like
I mean two
half
decades
a
ago.
decade or half a
Yeah,
century.
a few decades ago, and then what they did is they just worked, and they worked for peanuts compared to what our minimum wage is. They would probably get a fifth of what the minimum wage in South Africa now is, but it didn't matter because it was more than zero, and they would have gotten nothing if they didn't get that work. So they worked and they worked, and then the wages rose and the wages rose because the employers was able to pay them more because there was more production and more exports to other countries and more things being sold. And now look at South Korea. South Korea is probably one of the best places you can go work because of their salaries are so extremely high. It doesn't matter
Mhm.
what the communists say. I think Reaganomics, as it's called these days, is actually the best system that you can get.
Yeah, I mean, Reagan's whole mantra was that a rising tide lifts all boats,
Yeah,
and
definitely.
but I mean, then we have in the United States, and I'm sure this is the same in South Africa. We had President Obama came in, and I think it was either 2007 or 2008. In an interview, um, a reporter asked him if you knew for a fact that a certain policy, like raising taxes, would um, decrease the wages for all, but also decrease the wage gap between the rich and the poor, would you still implement it? And he said yes, on the basis of equality, meaning that he would
Definitely.
rather everyone be poorer as long as they weren't as long as the rich weren't 50 times richer, as long as they were only 20 times richer than the poor. But
Exactly.
that's the mindset that is just I can't wrap my head around it.
But you must understand that's not really the mindset, Brett. The real mindset is the politicians wants to get all the money for themselves and pretend that it's equity and it's making people more equal. So basically, everyone gets poor except the politicians who steal all the money for themselves or take all the money for themselves, and then that's good for them. You named Obama now. And with all of his socialist policies, where did that get him and where did that get the country? The country's economy didn't do well. Under that, people got a lot more poor, but Obama himself is now a multi-millionaire. So it's almost
Yeah.
exactly the same as here in South Africa. Now here you get Jacob Zuma, who just he just took about a cool $30 million from the state fund to go upgrade his house, to build a new swimming pool, and to upgrade features inside his house and so on. And he has still not been prosecuted for that, and it's okay, and nobody cares. And he got $30 million worth of upgrades to his house, and that's how it is. He's the president; he can do what he wants. Also, one of the schemes that we had here for black farmers or emerging farmers, as they call them, was that a lot of cattle was bought for these emerging farmers. I think it was worth about 15 or no 1.5 million US dollar, and that's about 2,000 head of cattle. And none of those cattle ended up on any of these emerging farms. All of those cattle ended up on Jacob Zuma's farm, who was the president. So that just gives you a bit of an insight into the communist mentality. I mean, it doesn't matter if it's Malema or Jacob Zuma or Cyril Ramaphosa or even Joseph Stalin and Vladimir Lenin. They also lived like kings in their own communist utopia, uh, while the people were starving to death.
Yeah, it reminds me of, especially with the talking about the farms, it reminds me of the animal farm analogy. It's two legs good, four legs better. Four legs No, two legs bad, four
Yeah,
legs good. Four legs
exactly.
good, two legs better. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's the top is always good. Luckily in the United States, it's not so outright the corruption. You know, you have to bend over backwards not to break any laws. But you know, people in power do find a way to enrich themselves,
Mm,
whether it's selling books or the Clintons. You know, became famous for going and
mm,
giving speeches to big banking companies and financial institutions and giving like you know hundreds of thousands of dollars, getting hundreds of thousands of dollars for an hour long speech. And so it's slightly different, but in the end of the day, you know, it's is it
mm.
really that much different? It's
I just saw a very interesting comment here in the comment section. Someone said I should point out that these people that demand the land would much rather take the money than the land, and we saw that a few times in history, yeah, in South Africa when expropriation with compensation was still a thing, and when they still gave the land to the actual people, then all those people did was the moment they got the farm or the house or whatever, they would sell it and take the money and buy themselves the latest Mercedes Benz, and then the state just decided, okay, all the land will go to the government, and they won't give any of that back to the people. They will just build houses for these people, but they will belong to the government, and that's a very big problem now in South Africa because all of these houses are now owned by the government. Those people don't have any money to do anything. If they just gave that houses to the people, let them sell it. That would have been better for the economy. At least they giving something back to the economy. Then the state is not shrinking the economy all the time as they are doing right now at this moment.
yeah, it goes back to that test that they do on children in psychology, where you can have one mushroom or marshmallow now, or you can
Hmm.
wait 30 minutes and you don't eat that marshmallow, and I'll give you a second marshmallow.
Yeah.
And half the children, toddlers eat the marshmallow and don't care, and then the other half wait it out and they have that long-term reward.
Are you sure it's half of them?
No, it's not half, but
I would say it's the
it's a
majority of
percentage
them
and a
will.
percentage.
Yeah, I would say it's the majority of them will rather eat the marshmallow right then, and the minority of them will eat the marshmallow later. Because I read up on that, and actually the ones that didn't eat the marshmallow right then were the ones that I had higher IQs of near genius and genius IQs, and that is a very small part of the population that has IQs that high. So yeah.
I don't think it wasn't that high. I mean, it wasn't 50-50, but they've tracked those children in those studies, and yeah, like you said, the ones who resisted and waited for the long-term reward ended up having better jobs. They went to school longer, majored in more rewarding
Fields,
fields of
yeah.
study. Yeah. So I think I'm not sure if it directly correlates with IQ or if it partly direct correlates with IQ and partly correlates with just some innate. Do you have the ability? Do you have that instinct to wait for the reward? But I mean, I think it all comes together in some way, shape, or form. In the end of the day, when you look at how they do in life, how they
Mm.
perform in their livelihood.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. As you say that, I would agree with you.
What other questions are
Let's
we getting?
Yeah, I'm looking right now for other questions actually in the question section here. Um, which African leader spent a quarter or more of his nation's wealth on his Napoleonish coronation in the 70s? I don't recall that. Must be Gaddafi or someone. I'm not 100% sure of that. That's the only question I see right now. Um, yeah,
Gaddafi's
maybe
a beast of a different kind. We
definitely.
could we could talk a whole day about Gaddafi.
Yeah. Um, I think we can end off this video here. If there's any other questions, I would be happy to answer them. Otherwise, we can end it off here. Let's see. Security. Yeah, that's something I must point out. Um, South African private security is bigger than both the army and the police combined. And that's something that I think should be pointed out for people who don't know South Africa, because I think that's the only country in the world where it's like that. Okay, let's see what else. What do you guys think? Do you guys think civil war is the future of South Africa? I can't answer that question. I really don't know. Did you mention your guest's name? Yes, I did mention your name at the beginning of the video. It's Brett Clark, my American guest. What's there as well? How many white Rhodesians are in South Africa now? I would say about 50,000 of them. Um,
Where else did they go when they left Rhodesia?
South Africa or Namibia, those were mostly where they went, or the richer ones went back to England. Do South Africans want to come back to the Netherlands or Belgium if the situation turns to genocide? I would think anyone would return to anywhere else but South Africa. Someone,
What was interesting is that the Dutch settlers weren't allowed to come back to the Netherlands.
yeah,
Uh,
I saw that they were not allowed
way
that
back
because
when.
of the very, very liberal government there. Cape succession with the Khoisan leaders, I know that is in the process of happening. I don't know where they are in the process, but I'm pretty sure that will never go through with the current government.
Where do Boers stand on that as a whole, though?
I would support the Khoisan succeeding the Cape. I don't know about other people, but I would definitely support them in that. Self-determination for every people, I think, is better.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's see what's there's as well. Do you think Malema is going to be indicted? I don't think so. I think the liberal or actually the communist judges will not do that. Okay, let's see what's else. Okay. What part of South Africa will be the last stand for the Boers? I would say that's probably going to be Pretoria, which is the highest density of white South Africans in South Africa. Um, does South Africa have universal healthcare? Yes, they do. And free primary education? Yes, they do. They have both, but both of them are dysfunctional, completely dysfunctional. And yeah, that's basically all I have to say about it. We talked about this earlier in the video.
Do most Boers send their children to the free school, or do they send them to a private institution?
No, definitely private medicine, only private medicine, mostly private schools, or we have something here that we call Model C schools, which is basically a school that has some funding from the state but is privately run. That's also where some of them send their children, or most of them actually. I'm looking here. The Koi King is more reasonable, isn't he? Yeah, I think he's a more reasonable guy than the current government. I haven't met him personally, but from what I read about him, it looks that way. Yeah, that looks like that's the only questions. I think we can end it off here and say goodbye to our listeners. Thanks
All right.
for having you on, Brett. Do you have any?
Thanks for
Do
having
you
me.
have any closing statements?
I think hopefully some people in the United States open their eyes to what's happening, and something peaceful. A peaceful resolution can come from the Afriforum visit. That's a discussion for another day.
All right, thank you, Brett. Thank you for being on my show, and I think we had quite a positive interview. And thank you for you guys who listened. I hope to see you guys again next time. Goodbye.